I didn't know that giving away my only coat that night would make me part of a world I could never walk away from. The cold hit different at 2 a.m., the kind that didn't just bite your skin but settled into your bones like it planned to stay, and I pulled my thin sweater tighter around me as I stepped out of the diner, the neon sign flickering behind me like it was just as exhausted as I was after a double shift that paid me barely enough to cover rent. My breath came out in small white clouds, each one disappearing faster than I could take the next step, and I remember thinking I should have taken the bus, even if it meant spending my last $3. But I needed the walk to clear my head, needed something quiet after hours of coffee refills and fake smiles. The street was nearly empty, just a few parked cars dusted in fresh snow and the distant hum of traffic somewhere far enough away to feel like another world. And that's when I saw her, small, too small to be out here alone, sitting on the curb like she'd been forgotten by everything and everyone, her knees pulled to her chest, her shoulders trembling in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with cold. She couldn't have been more than 6, maybe 7, her dark hair catching flakes of snow that melted too slowly against skin that had already gone pale. And for a second I just stood there, because in a city like this you learn not to get involved. You learn to keep walking, to mind your own business, to pretend you don't see things that don't make sense. But she looked up at me, and her eyes, they weren't crying, they weren't panicked, they were just quiet, too quiet for someone her age. And that silence pulled me in faster than anything else could. I didn't ask questions, didn't think about consequences. I just moved, crossing the street without even checking for traffic, my sneakers crunching softly against the thin layer of snow as I approached her. "Hey," I said, my voice coming out softer than I expected, like I didn't want to scare her away. She didn't answer, just watched me, her small hands tucked under her arms like she was trying to hold on to whatever warmth she had left. And that's when I noticed what she was wearing, or more like what she wasn't wearing. No coat. Just a light long-sleeve shirt that might have worked on a cool fall day, but had no business being out here in January when it was barely 20 degrees. And something inside me twisted tight, the kind of feeling you don't argue with. I crouched down in front of her, ignoring how the cold seeped instantly through my jeans. "Where's your family?" I asked, but she didn't answer that either, her gaze flicking briefly over my shoulder before settling back on me. And I followed her eyes instinctively. But there was nothing there, just the empty street stretching out under dim streetlights. I swallowed, then made a decision that felt both small and irreversible at the same time. I slipped my coat off, the only real layer I had between me and the night. And for half a second the cold hit me, so sharply it stole my breath. But I ignored it. Gently draping the coat over her shoulders, it swallowed her whole, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the fabric still warm from my body. And she flinched slightly at first, like she wasn't used to being touched, but then she stilled, her fingers slowly gripping the edges of the coat like she didn't quite trust it was real. "There," I murmured, adjusting it around her. "That's better." She looked down at herself, then back up at me, and for the first time, something changed in her expression. Not a smile, not exactly, but something softer, something that felt like it mattered more. And before I could say anything else, before I could figure out what came next, the sound of an engine cut through the silence, low and smooth, too controlled to belong to just anyone. Headlights washed over us, bright and blinding, and I turned instinctively, raising a hand to shield my eyes as a black SUV rolled to a stop just a few feet away. The kind of car you don't see parked outside diners or on streets like this unless something important is happening. The doors didn't open right away, and for a second everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. Then the back door clicked open, slow, deliberate, and I felt it before I even saw him. That shift in the air, that quiet kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself to be understood, and I realized, too late, that maybe I hadn't just helped a lost child. Maybe I had just stepped into something much bigger than me. I should have stepped back when that door opened, should have taken the girl's hand, walked the other way, pretended none of this was mine to carry, but my feet stayed rooted to the frozen pavement as the man stepped out of the SUV like the cold did not touch him at all, like the night itself made space for him to exist. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, his coat tailored, dark, perfect against the falling snow, and there was something in the way he moved that made everything else feel slower, smaller, less important. His eyes found the girl first, not me, not the street, Just her, sharp and focused in a way that made my chest tighten without understanding why. "Lily," he said, his voice low, controlled, and the girl beside me shifted slightly, her fingers tightening around the coat I had given her. That was the first moment I realized she knew him, not just knew him, trusted him. The kind of trust that does not question anything. And then his gaze lifted to me, and I felt it like a physical thing, like standing too close to something powerful and not knowing where the edges were. He did not look surprised, did not look angry. He just looked at me like I was something he had not expected, but was already deciding what to do with. "You put that on her," he said, not a question, just an observation, and I swallowed, suddenly aware of the cold creeping through my sweater, of how exposed I felt without my coat. She was freezing. I answered, my voice steadier than I felt, and for a second nothing happened. The snow kept falling. The engine of the SUV hummed softly behind him. And then Lily moved, small and certain, stepping away from me and toward him, but she did not take the coat off. She kept it wrapped around her like it belonged there, like it belonged to her now. And when she reached him, she did something I did not expect. She took his hand, then glanced back at me. And that look held me in place more than anything else could. There was something in it that felt like a thread, thin but unbreakable, connecting me to a moment I did not understand yet. The man noticed it too. I could tell by the slight shift in his expression, not soft, not warm, but something changed, something recalibrated. "You should not be out here alone," he said to me, his voice still calm. But now there was something else underneath it, something that sounded almost like concern, but carried weight, like it came with rules I did not know. I let out a small breath, half a laugh that did not quite form. "Neither should she," I replied before I could stop myself, and the words hung there, sharp and fragile. I expected pushback, expected something colder, but instead he studied me for a long second, his eyes moving over me, taking in details I had not offered, the thin sweater, the worn shoes, the way my hands trembled slightly from the cold I was trying to ignore. "What is your name?" he asked, and it was not casual, not polite conversation. It felt like something being recorded, something that would not be forgotten. "Emily," I said, hesitating just enough to make it clear I was not used to giving that information to strangers. "Emily Carter," he repeated, like testing how it sounded, like placing it somewhere in his mind where it would stay, and then he nodded once. A small motion that somehow felt final, like a decision had been made without my input. "You gave her warmth when she needed it," he said quietly, his gaze flicking briefly to the coat around Lily's shoulders before returning to me. "That matters." And I did not know what to say to that, because it felt too big for what I had done, too heavy for something that had been instinct, not intention. One of the men from the front seat stepped out then, silent, professional, holding something in his hands, a folded coat, expensive, untouched by the night. He moved toward Lily, but the girl shook her head slightly, tightening her grip on mine, on the coat, and the man paused, looking back at the one in charge, waiting, always waiting. The silence stretched again, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for something I could not name. The man finally spoke, not to his people, but to me. "Keep it on her," he said, and there was no argument in his tone, no room for disagreement, just a quiet certainty that made it feel like the only option. And then, softer, almost too soft to catch if I had not been standing right there, he added, "I will remember this." And something about the way he said it made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, because it did not sound like gratitude. It sounded like a promise. And I had the sudden, unshakable feeling that whatever this moment was, whatever line I had just crossed without realizing it, there was no going back to the person I had been before. The car door closed with a soft, final sound that echoed louder in my chest than it should have, and I stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching as the black SUV pulled away like it had never been part of my night, like none of it had actually happened, except it had, because the cold hit me all at once without my coat, sharp and immediate, forcing me to wrap my arms around myself as I exhaled slowly, trying to steady something inside me that refused to settle. I told myself to walk, just walk, go home, forget it, but every step felt heavier than the last, like I was leaving something unfinished behind me, something I did not understand yet. The street felt quieter now, emptier, like whatever presence had filled it moments ago had taken the air with it, and I kept replaying his words in my head, not the tone, not the way he stood, but the exact phrasing. I will remember this. It should have sounded simple, maybe even grateful, but it did not. It felt like something else, something permanent, and I did not like how that made me feel. By the time I reached my apartment building, my fingers were numb and my thoughts were louder than the city around me. The lobby heater hummed softly as I stepped inside, and the sudden warmth made my skin sting. I climbed the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, more out of habit than choice, each step grounding me in something familiar, something normal. My door creaked the same way it always did when I pushed it open, the small studio greeting me with its usual quiet, the kind that felt safe because it was predictable. I kicked off my shoes, set my bag down, and leaned against the door for a moment, closing my eyes as I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. It was just a moment, I told myself. Just a girl, a coat, a man with too much presence for a simple street corner. Nothing more, nothing that should follow me here. And yet, when I finally moved further inside, something felt different, subtle but undeniable, like the air had shifted in a way I could not see. I shook it off, blaming exhaustion, blaming the long shift, blaming anything that made more sense than whatever my instincts were trying to tell me. I made a cup of instant coffee even though it was past 3 in the morning, the routine steadying my hands, the familiar bitterness grounding me. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the steam rising from the mug, trying to push the night out of my mind. But it lingered, the way his eyes had looked at me, the way Lily had held onto that coat like it mattered more than anything else, and the way I had not walked away when I should have. I told myself I would forget by morning, that things like this did not carry over into daylight, that people like him did not cross into lives like mine more than once. But even as that thought formed, a quiet doubt settled in, heavy and certain, like a truth I had not accepted yet. I set the mug down and lay back on the bed fully dressed, too tired to care, staring up at the ceiling as the city outside slowly shifted toward morning. And just as sleep began to pull me under, soft and reluctant, a single thought stayed sharp and clear in my mind. Not fear, not regret, just a quiet, unsettling realization that felt impossible to ignore. I had given away my coat, something small, something replaceable, but somehow, it did not feel like that was all I had lost that night. It felt like I had stepped into something that had already begun to move toward me long before I understood it. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel in control of where my life was going next. The knock came at 9:12 a.m., soft but deliberate, the kind that did not belong to neighbors or delivery drivers, and I froze halfway through pulling my sweater over my head, my mind still foggy from barely 3 hours of sleep and too many thoughts that had refused to quiet down. I stood there for a second, listening, hoping maybe I had imagined it, but then it came again, the same rhythm, calm, patient, certain, like whoever was on the other side already knew I was there. My chest tightened in a way I could not explain, because nothing about my life required this kind of knock. Nothing about me should attract attention like that. I moved slowly, each step toward the door heavier than the last, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of the handle as I hesitated, telling myself I was overthinking, that it was probably nothing, but something inside me disagreed, something quiet and insistent that had been there since last night. I opened the door just enough to see, and the first thing I noticed was the suit, dark, tailored, out of place in a hallway that smelled faintly of old paint and burnt coffee. Then I looked up and met a face I did not recognize, but the expression was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. Neutral, controlled, observant. "Emily Carter," he said, not asking, just confirming, and I felt that same invisible line from last night tighten around me. I did not answer right away, my hand still on the door like I might close it if I moved too fast. "Yes," I said finally, because denying it felt pointless. His gaze shifted briefly past me, scanning the small space behind me without stepping inside, respectful in distance but not in awareness, like he already knew more than he should. "I was asked to deliver something to you," he continued, his voice even, professional, and that was when I saw what he was holding. A box, not large, but expensive in a way that did not need branding to be obvious. Clean lines, matte black, the kind of packaging that belonged to places I did not shop, places I did not even walk past unless I had to. I stared at it for a second, then back at him. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, even though I knew I did not. Even though something in me had already connected the dots I did not want to see. He did not argue, did not insist. He simply extended the box slightly toward me, waiting, patient again, like he had all the time in the world, and I was the only one who needed to catch up. "It is for you," he said, and there was no emotion in it, no persuasion, just certainty, and I realized then that this was not a mistake. This was not random. This was intentional, and the memory of that quiet voice from the night before settled heavily in my chest. I will remember this. I exhaled slowly, then took the box, the weight of it surprising me, solid, real, and the moment it left his hands, he nodded once, the same small, final motion I had seen before. "Have a good day, Miss Carter," he added, already stepping back, already done, and before I could ask anything, before I could say I did not want this, did not need this, he turned and walked down the hallway with the same controlled ease, disappearing around the corner like he had never been there. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, the box in my hands, the morning light filtering through the small window behind me, making everything feel too normal for what had just happened. I closed the door slowly, locking it without thinking, then walked back into my apartment, placing the box on the small table like it might mean something different if I did not touch it right away. But it did not change anything. It was still there, still real, still connected to a moment I could not undo. I circled it once, then again, like I was waiting for it to explain itself, but it stayed silent, and finally, with a breath I did not fully release, I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly folded, was a coat. Not just any coat, but one that looked warmer than anything I had ever owned. Soft, structured, untouched by wear. And for a second I just stared at it, my mind catching up slowly. Then I saw it, resting on top, a small card. Simple, no logo, no decoration, just a single line written in clean, precise handwriting. I picked it up carefully, like it might disappear if I moved too fast, and read the words that changed everything in a way I could not take back. "You should not be cold again." I read the note 3 times before I realized I was still holding my breath. The words simple, almost gentle, but they did not feel light in my hands. They felt deliberate, like they carried weight I had not agreed to carry. "You should not be cold again," I whispered under my breath, testing how it sounded out loud. And somehow it felt even more personal, like it had been written for a version of me I did not fully understand yet. I set the card down slowly, my fingers brushing against the edge of the coat again, the fabric soft beneath my touch, warmer than anything I owned. Warmer than anything I could afford. And that was the problem. This was not just a gift, it was a statement, something intentional, something that reached further than a simple thank you. I stepped back from the table, shaking my head slightly as if that would reset everything. "No," I said quietly, more to myself than anything else. "This is too much." Because it had to be, people did not do this. For strangers, not in my world, not without expecting something in return. I paced the small space of my apartment, the coat pulling my attention back no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, my mind replaying every detail from last night. The way he had looked at me, the way he had spoken, calm, certain, like nothing about me was insignificant once he decided it was not, and that thought unsettled me more than anything else. I stopped walking and looked at the coat again, then at the door, the distance between the two suddenly feeling like a choice I had to make. I could keep it, pretend this was kindness, pretend it ended there, or I could return it, draw a line before something I did not understand became something I could not control. The decision came faster than I expected, sharp and clear. I grabbed the coat, folding it quickly, more roughly than it deserved, then picked up the card, sliding it back inside the box like I was undoing something, like I could reverse the moment if I acted fast enough. I did not even change, did not think about how cold it still was outside. I just moved, pulling my shoes on and heading for the door before I could second-guess myself. The hallway felt longer this time, quieter, and by the time I stepped out into the street, the air hit me again, just as cold as the night before, but now it felt different, sharper, more real, like I had something to prove to it. I walked faster than necessary, my grip tightening on the box as I replayed the only clue I had. The man, the car, The street corner. It was not much, but it was enough to start somewhere. I reached the intersection where everything had changed less than 12 hours ago. And for a moment, I just stood there, the city moving around me like nothing had happened, like this was just another morning, another ordinary place. But it was not ordinary to me anymore. I scanned the street, the sidewalks, the parked cars, searching for something, anything that connected to him. But there was nothing obvious, no black SUV, no men in suits, just people passing by, lost in their own lives, and I felt a flicker of doubt. Maybe this was pointless. Maybe I was chasing something that did not want to be found. I exhaled slowly, my breath visible in the cold air, and turned slightly, considering heading back, telling myself I had tried. That was enough. But then I noticed it, subtle, almost easy to miss. A car parked a little too still, a figure leaning just slightly too aware, and when my eyes met his, I knew instantly, he was not surprised to see me. Not even a little. He straightened slightly, his expression unreadable but attentive, like he had been waiting without making it obvious. And in that moment, something inside me settled into a quiet, undeniable truth. This was not coincidence. This was not chance. This was something already in motion, something I had stepped into the moment I gave that coat away. I walked toward him before I could stop myself, each step steady despite the questions racing in my mind. And when I stopped a few feet away, holding out the box between us, my voice came out clear, stronger than I felt. I cannot accept this, I said. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. This was not just about a coat anymore, and whatever came next was not going to be simple. The man did not take the box right away. He just looked at it, then at me, like he was measuring something I could not see, something beyond the simple gesture of returning a coat. And for a second the street noise faded again, the distant cars, the footsteps, everything dulled under the weight of that quiet pause. "Miss Carter," he said finally, his tone unchanged, calm, controlled. But there was a slight shift now, something more attentive. Like my refusal had adjusted whatever expectation he had. "You were not asked to accept it," he continued, his eyes steady on mine. "It was given." And that word landed heavier than it should have. Given, not offered, not suggested, and I felt a flicker of frustration rise in my chest, sharp enough to push me forward. "That is exactly the problem," I replied, tightening my grip on the box before extending it again, more firmly this time. "I did not do anything that requires this kind of return." He watched me carefully, not interrupting, not dismissing, just listening in a way that made me more aware of every word I chose. And that unsettled me more than if he had argued back. "I helped a kid," I added, my voice softer but more certain. "That should not come with conditions." His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted slightly, like he was recalculating again, always adjusting, always aware. "There are no conditions," he said. And the way he said it made it sound true, but not simple, not easy, just true in a way that came with layers I could not see. I shook my head. A small motion, but enough to show I did not believe that fully. "People like you do not do things like this without a reason," I said before I could stop myself. And the moment the words left my mouth, I felt it, the subtle tension in the air, not anger, not threat, just awareness, like I had stepped closer to something I did not fully understand. His gaze held mine for a second longer, and then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth shifted, not quite a smile, but something close, something brief and controlled. "People like me," he repeated, almost thoughtfully, as if testing the phrase rather than rejecting it. "And what do you think that means?" The question caught me off guard, not because I did not have an answer, but because I was not sure how much of it I should say out loud. I hesitated, then exhaled quietly, choosing honesty over caution. "It means you do not forget things," I said, my voice steady again. "And when you give something, it is never small." The silence that followed felt different this time, less tense, more focused, like the conversation had shifted into something deeper without either of us planning it. He nodded once, slowly, acknowledging something in my words without confirming or denying them. "You are right about one thing," he said, his tone quieter now, more deliberate. "I do not forget." And there it was. Again, that same weight from the night before. That same certainty that made everything feel like it was moving forward whether I agreed or not. I took a small step back, the cold biting at my skin but grounding me enough to stay clear. Then remember this, I said, holding the box out one last time, my voice firm. I do not need this. For a moment, I thought he would refuse again, that this would turn into something I could not walk away from. But instead, he reached out and took the box, his movements precise, unhurried, like he had already decided this outcome was acceptable. And that surprised me more than anything else. He glanced down at the box briefly, then back at me, his expression unreadable again, but not distant, not disconnected, just controlled. Very well, he said simply, and there was no disappointment in it, no resistance, just acceptance, but not the kind that ends something, the kind that pauses it. I felt a small release in my chest, like I had regained something I did not realize I was losing. Thank you, I added, more out of habit than necessity. And then I turned slightly, ready to leave, ready to step back into a version of my life that made sense again. But his voice stopped me before I could take more than one step. Emily, he said, and the way he said my name made me pause without thinking. I looked back over my shoulder, meeting his gaze again. If there are no conditions, he continued, his tone steady, almost quiet, then there is no reason for you to avoid me either. The words settled slowly, unexpected and unsettling in a completely different way, not a demand, not a command, just a statement that felt like it opened a door I had just tried to close. I did not answer right away, because I did not have an answer that felt safe. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something that shifted everything just slightly out of place. This was not about control in the way I thought. It was something else, something more patient, more deliberate, and somehow, that made it harder to walk away. I did not answer him, not because I did not hear the question, but because I felt it settle somewhere deeper than words, somewhere that did not respond easily. And for a moment I just stood there, the cold air wrapping around me again, grounding me in something real while everything else felt slightly off balance. I am not avoiding you, I said finally, even though part of me knew that was not entirely true, because walking away had felt like the safest choice I had, and safety had always been something I held on to tightly. His gaze did not shift, did not press, just stayed steady on mine like he was listening for something beyond the words themselves. Then do not, he replied simply, and the simplicity of it made it harder to argue, harder to dismiss, because there was no force behind it, no expectation spoken out loud, just a quiet certainty that lingered longer than it should have. I nodded once, a small, uncertain motion that did not feel like agreement, but did not feel like refusal either. And then I turned, actually turned this time, taking a step away from him, then another, my pace steady even as my thoughts were anything but. I did not look back again. I told myself I would not, because looking back felt like acknowledging something I was not ready to understand. The city noise returned gradually as I moved further down the street, cars passing, people talking, life continuing like nothing had shifted, but it had. I could feel it in the way my chest felt tighter, in the way my mind kept replaying every word, every look, every pause. By the time I reached the diner, the familiar bell above the door chimed as I stepped inside, the warmth hitting me again, wrapping around me in a way that felt almost too normal after everything else. You look like you saw a ghost, Sarah's voice came from behind the counter, light, teasing, the kind of normal I usually leaned into without thinking. I forced a small smile, slipping behind the counter and tying my apron with fingers that still felt a little stiff from the cold. Just a long night, I said, keeping it simple, because explaining it out loud would make it real in a way I was not ready for. The morning rush came quickly, orders, coffee, conversations that blurred together in the way they always did, and for a while, I let myself disappear into it, into the routine, into the predictability of things that made sense. But even then, something lingered, a quiet awareness that did not fade no matter how busy I became. I noticed it first in the reflection of the window, a dark car parked across the street, not unusual on its own, but it stayed there longer than most, too still, too consistent. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was connecting things that were not there, but when I glanced again 20 minutes later, it had not moved, and something in my chest tightened just slightly, not fear, not yet, just awareness. I turned away, focusing on the customer in front of me, taking their order, pouring coffee, keeping my voice steady, but my attention drifted back again and again, small glances I could not stop myself from making, until finally, during a quieter moment, I stepped closer to the window, just enough to see without making it obvious. And that was when the door of the car opened, not suddenly, not urgently, just smoothly, controlled, and the same man from earlier stepped out, the one who had taken the box, his posture straight, his expression calm, like he was not interrupting anything, like he belonged exactly where he was. And when his eyes lifted, they found mine immediately, not searching, not guessing, just knowing, like he had been waiting. For that exact moment, my breath caught for half a second before I forced it steady again, because this was not a coincidence anymore. This was not something I could ignore or explain away. This was intentional, deliberate. And as he began walking toward the diner, each step unhurried but certain, I realized something that settled quietly but firmly in my mind. Returning the coat had not ended anything. It had only changed the way it would continue. I felt it before the door even opened. That same shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like something precise had entered a space that usually ran on noise and routine. The bell chimed above the diner door, and I did not need to turn to know it was him. But I did anyway, because not looking felt like pretending, and pretending had already stopped working. He stepped inside without hesitation, his presence cutting cleanly through the morning crowd without raising his voice or drawing attention in any obvious way. And yet people noticed. I saw it in the way conversations dipped for a second, in the way a couple at the corner table glanced up and then quickly backed down, like instinct told them to stay out of whatever this was. He moved toward the counter with that same controlled ease, not rushed, not slow, just certain, and I realized something I had not admitted yet. He did not follow, he arrived. There was a difference. Coffee, he said when he reached me, his tone calm, almost casual, like this was a normal interaction between two people who existed in the same world. I nodded automatically, turning to grab a mug, my hands steady even as my thoughts were not. I poured the coffee, set it in front of him, and for a second neither of us spoke, the space between us filled with something quiet and heavy that did not belong in a place like this. You found me again, I said finally, keeping my voice low, not wanting to pull anyone else into whatever this was. He looked at me, not surprised, not defensive, just present. I did not lose you, he replied, and the words settled differently than I expected, not possessive, not forceful, just certain, and that certainty made my chest tighten slightly. This is my job, I said, gesturing lightly around me. The worn counter, the chipped mugs, the kind of life that was simple because it had to be. It is not exactly hard to find. He nodded once, acknowledging the truth in that without adding anything unnecessary, then took a small sip of the coffee, like he was giving me space to decide what came next, and I realized I was the one holding the tension now, not him. You returned the coat, he said after a moment, setting the mug down carefully, his eyes never leaving mine. I exhaled softly, leaning one hand against the counter, grounding myself in something solid. Yes, I answered, because I meant what I said. He studied me again, that same quiet evaluation, but it felt different now, less distant, more focused, like he was trying to understand rather than categorize. You do not accept help easily, he observed, and I let out a small breath that almost turned into a laugh. I accept help when it makes sense. I corrected gently, not when it comes with weight. I hesitated slightly on the last word, because I was not sure how else to describe it. He seemed to consider that, his fingers resting lightly against the mug. And what if it does not come with weight? He asked, his tone steady, almost curious, and that question lingered longer than it should have, because part of me wanted to believe it, wanted to see this as simple, but something deeper held me back. Then it would not look like that, I said, nodding slightly toward the door, toward the car that was still parked outside, toward everything that made this situation anything but ordinary. His gaze followed the direction briefly, then returned to me, and for the first time since he walked in, something shifted in his expression, not a smile, not softness, but something closer to understanding. You measure things by how they appear, he said quietly, and I shook my head almost immediately. No, I replied, meeting his eyes fully now. I measure them by how they feel. The silence that followed was different, not tense, not uncertain, just still, like something had aligned in a way neither of us had expected. He held my gaze for a second longer, then nodded slightly, slower this time, more deliberate. "Then tell me," he said, his voice lower now, almost blending into the quiet hum of the diner. "How does this feel?" And the question caught me off guard in a way nothing else had, because it was not about control, not about decisions. It was about something else entirely, something I was not prepared to answer. I hesitated, my fingers tightening slightly against the edge of the counter as I searched for something honest, something that would not pull me further in than I was ready for. And when I finally spoke, my voice came out softer than I intended. "It feels like something that is not going to stay small." And as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew they were true, not just about him, not just about this moment, but about everything that had started the second I stopped walking that night, and the way he looked at me after that, not surprised, not denying it, just accepting it like it had always been part of the equation, made one thing painfully clear: whatever this was, it had already begun, and neither of us was pretending otherwise anymore. The moment stretched between us, quiet but full, like the entire diner had faded into the background and left just the two of us standing in something neither of us had planned, but both of us understood, and I realized I was still waiting for him to dismiss what I said, to reduce it to something simple, something manageable, but he did not. He just looked at me, steady and unreadable, and then he nodded once, slow and certain, like he had already accepted what I was only beginning to admit. "It was never meant to stay small," he said, his voice low enough that it did not travel beyond the counter, and something in my chest shifted at that. Not fear, not exactly, but awareness, the kind that settles in quietly and refuses to leave. I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding, my fingers loosening slightly against the edge of the counter as I searched for something to hold on to that felt familiar. "You talk like this was planned," I said, trying to keep my tone light. But it came out softer, more honest than I intended. He tilted his head just slightly, considering that, and for a second I thought he might deny it, might say something that would give me an easy way out of this. But instead, he did the opposite. "Not planned," he said, recognized. And that word lingered, heavier than it should have been, because it implied something I was not ready to name, something that reached further back than a single night, further than a simple choice. I shook my head slightly, a reflex more than anything else. "You do not even know me," I said, and this time there was no hesitation in my voice, just truth, simple and clear. He did not argue, did not rush to correct me. He just held my gaze, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. "I know enough," he said, and there it was again, that certainty, not loud, not forceful, just present in a way that made it impossible to ignore. I glanced away for a moment, breaking eye contact just long enough to steady myself, to remind myself where I was, who I was, the hum of the coffee machine, the low murmur of conversations around me, the normal things that should have kept everything grounded. But when I looked back at him, that same feeling returned instantly, like none of that mattered in the space between us. "And what is enough?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more measured, because I was not sure I wanted the answer, but I knew I was going to hear it anyway. He did not answer right away, his gaze shifting briefly toward the window, toward the street outside, then back to me, like he was choosing his words carefully. "You saw someone who needed warmth," he said slowly, "and you gave it without asking who she was, or what it would cost you." I felt my chest tighten slightly at that, because hearing it said out loud made it sound bigger than it had felt in the moment. "That tells me more than most things would," he finished, and I did not have an immediate response, because part of me wanted to dismiss it, to say it did not mean anything, that anyone would have done the same, but I knew that was not true. Not everyone would have stopped, not everyone would have stayed. The silence between us deepened again, but it did not feel uncomfortable this time, just real, like something had shifted into place without either of us forcing it. He reached for his coffee again, taking a small sip, then setting it down with the same careful precision, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a different weight, quieter, but more certain. "Emily," he said, and the way he said my name made me focus completely, like everything else faded for just a second. "You are not part of my world," he continued, and I felt a small, unexpected sense of relief at that, like he was finally acknowledging the difference between us, But then he added, "But you stepped into it anyway." And that relief disappeared just as quickly as it came, replaced by something more complicated, something I could not easily define. I swallowed slowly, my thoughts catching up with the truth of what he was saying, because he was not wrong. I had stepped into something, even if I had not meant to, even if I had not understood it at the time. "I did not mean to," I said quietly, and for the first time, there was a hint of vulnerability in my voice that I did not try to hide. He nodded slightly, like he expected that answer, like it changed nothing. "Intent does not change the moment," he replied, and the calm certainty in his voice made it clear he believed that completely. I looked at him for a long second, searching for something that would make this easier, something that would simplify what was happening. But there was nothing simple about it. Not anymore. And as the seconds passed, one thought settled in my mind with a clarity I could not ignore. I had tried to return the coat, tried to close the door on whatever this was before it could begin. But standing here now, looking at him, hearing the way he spoke like this was only the beginning of something larger. I understood something I had been avoiding since the night everything changed. I had not just given away a coat. I had opened something that was already moving toward me whether I accepted it or not. And as I held his gaze, steady now despite everything else, I realized there was only one truth left to face. I could walk away from him, from this moment, from whatever this was becoming, but it would not mean I had escaped it. It would only mean I had chosen not to understand it, and for reasons I could not fully explain yet. That felt harder than staying.